Under the Muslim Khilafah, the Jews were able to live their lives as Jews, and Torah study flourished. As a result of this historical reality, which was an evolutionary process over a period of generations, the center of gravity in the Jewish world and the Torah world shifted from Eretz Yisrael to Babel. And as a result, and this is the true reason as opposed to other suggestions that have been made, Talmud Bavli, that is to say the Talmud which sums up all the opinions and discussions of the sages in the yeshivot of Babel, that became the standard text for the Jewish people. It was disseminated throughout the world. You have to keep in mind also the fact that during this period, the period of the Geonim, we're talking about the 8th, 9th, 10th centuries and even beyond, the power of the Muslim Empire, which had its capital in Baghdad, was very great, was immense in fact. It was the largest and most powerful, the richest empire in the world. It was the center of international finance, just as perhaps Manhattan is today. So was Baghdad in those days. All roads led not to Rome but to Baghdad. Interesting and relevant to note that the famous yeshiva in Babel called Sura because it was actually situated in a town, a satellite town of Baghdad called Sura, which is just a short distance from Baghdad, was right there next to the capital, the seat of power, the seat of government of the Muslim Empire. It was in the interests of the Caliphate to have the center of the Jewish world under its own control and dominion. This only increased the power and the influence of the Muslim regime and the Arab Empire, so that Jews throughout the world were linked to the center of gravity of Jewish affairs in Babel, and in such a way, by way of trade routes, many merchants who traveled backwards and forwards bringing expensive and rare items from the East to Europe, etc. The Babylonian Talmud and Babylonian traditions and minhagim, customs, became the norm in the Jewish world, and this was in fact the reason why the Talmud Bavli became the more dominant text. There was never any decision on the part of the Jewish people or any particular group of Jews or even one isolated community to accept this or that book. It was simply a process of osmosis, a process of gradual influence caused for the reasons that we mentioned. One can prove this very simply by pointing to the fact that as late as the 14th century, we see clear references in rabbinic literature to the fact that there were communities of Jews who maintained halakhic practices and customs and prayer liturgy not based on the Babylonian model, and they were sometimes castigated for this fact because other authorities had a vested interest. The Babylonian authorities certainly had such a vested interest in forcing their position, their view, their liturgy, their customs and their halakhic practices on the entire Jewish world. There was always a lot of tension between the two Torah centers, Eretz Yisrael and Babel, and over time the Babylonian center won that particular battle for the historical reasons that I mentioned, but not for any cogent Torah or intellectual reasons. There was never any such decision. There was no conscious effort to decide the matter in any way. It wasn't a question of deciding. It was a question of influence and historical realities, the weight of historical facts